The security scanner at Ouagadougou International Airport started beeping in a pattern the operator had never heard before. It was 11:47 p.m. on a humid Thursday night when the UN inspector, who had just finished a 2-week evaluation of Burkina Faso's governance systems, placed his leather briefcase on the conveyor belt. The scanner screen displayed something that made the operator call his supervisor, who called the airport security chief, who called the military, who called President Ibrahim Traoré directly. Inside the briefcase weren't just documents. There were 25 passports, each with the inspector's photograph but different names, different nationalities, and, most impossibly, all genuine documents verified by their respective countries' databases. The man standing calmly at the security checkpoint, still wearing his UN badge identifying him as Dr. Martin Kellner, senior governance inspector, was simultaneously a citizen of 25 different nations, held 25 different identities, and according to the diplomatic pouches found in his possession, had 25 different reasons for being in Burkina Faso, none of them involving inspection of governance. The arrest happened so quietly that other passengers didn't even notice. Traoré had specifically instructed his security team to avoid creating a scene that might alert potential collaborators. Dr. Kellner, if that was even his real name, showed no surprise when military officers approached him. He simply nodded, as if he had been expecting this moment for years, and followed them to a secure vehicle without resistance. His last words before entering the vehicle were peculiar: "I suppose my time is up. 25 lives are perhaps too many for one man to live." The initial interrogation revealed layers of mystery that defied conventional understanding. Each passport was not a forgery, but an authentic document issued by legitimate government agencies. The American passport showed him as Michael Anderson, an agricultural consultant from Iowa. The Russian passport identified him as Mikhail Volov, an energy sector analyst from Moscow. The Chinese passport named him Chen Wei, an infrastructure specialist from Beijing. The Nigerian passport called him Adebayo Okono, a healthcare administrator from Lagos. Each identity came with complete backstories, employment histories, tax records, and even family photographs, though no actual families could be found. The discovery triggered immediate verification attempts with 25 different embassies. Every single one confirmed their passport was genuine. The American embassy verified that Michael Anderson had been issued his passport in Denver in 2015. The Russian embassy confirmed Mikhail Volov's passport was renewed in Moscow in 2019. The Chinese embassy stated Chen Wei's passport was completely legitimate. How could one man officially exist as 25 different people in 25 different countries' official systems? The apartment Kellner had been renting in Ouagadougou's diplomatic quarter revealed the scope of his operation. 25 separate rooms had been created within a space that should have held 5. Each room was decorated to match a different nationality: American baseball memorabilia in one, Russian Orthodox icons in another, Chinese calligraphy in a third. Each room contained complete wardrobes of culturally appropriate clothing down to correct brands of toiletries and styles of underwear. Each had computers logged into different email accounts, phones with different country SIM cards, and even different brands of coffee and tea. It was as if 25 different people lived in the same space without ever meeting. The financial investigation uncovered banking relationships that shouldn't have been possible. Kellner had accounts in 25 different names in 25 different countries, all legally opened with proper documentation. The American account showed regular deposits from the U.S. Department of Agriculture for consulting work. The Russian account received payments from Gazprom for energy analysis. The Chinese account had transfers from state construction companies. In total, he had been receiving roughly $2 million annually across all identities, all for work that extensive investigation suggested he had actually been performing. The work records were the most baffling aspect. Kellner had somehow been physically present at meetings in different countries on the same days. Time-stamped photographs showed him at an agriculture conference in Iowa on March 15 at 10 a.m., at an energy summit in Moscow on March 15 at 3 p.m., and at an infrastructure review in Beijing on March 15 at 8 p.m. Flight records showed no international travel on those dates. Security footage from all 3 events confirmed his presence. The physical impossibility of his simultaneous existence in multiple locations challenged basic understanding of reality. The technology discovered in his apartment offered partial explanations that raised more questions. Hidden behind false walls were holographic front projection systems decades ahead of commercial technology. These systems could create convincing three-dimensional representations that appeared to interact with environments, shaking hands, even eating meals. But holograms couldn't open bank accounts, couldn't get passports, couldn't pass biometric scans. The technology explains some mysteries while deepening others. The interview techniques Traoré employed were unconventional but effective. Rather than aggressive interrogation, he chose to engage Kellner in intellectual conversation, appealing to what seemed to be the man's desire to finally tell someone the truth after years of deception. Over cups of tea in a secure facility, Kellner began revealing a story that would reshape understanding of international organizations, identity, and the nature of sovereignty itself. Kellner claimed his real name was James Patterson, and he had been recruited out of MIT in 1987 by an organization that didn't officially exist. This organization, which he called the Stateless, operated between nations, using the gaps and contradictions in international law to exist everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. They weren't spies in the traditional sense, but something new, identity merchants, who had discovered how to exploit the bureaucratic systems that define citizenship and nationality. The process of creating multiple legal identities had begun with a simple observation: no country's system talked to any other country's system in real time. A birth in one country could be registered years later in another. A death in one nation might never be reported to another. Educational credentials from one system were rarely verified by another. The Stateless had mapped these gaps and learned to navigate them like sailors reading ocean currents. The recruitment process for the Stateless was itself a testament to their methods. They identified brilliant students who had one crucial characteristic: bureaucratic invisibility. These were people whose births had been registered late, whose parents had moved frequently, whose educational records were scattered across institutions. They looked for those who already existed in the margins of documentation, then taught them to expand those margins into entire parallel lives. The training Kellner described sounded like something from science fiction. For 5 years, he had lived in a facility that existed in no country, built on a platform in international waters, supplied by ships registered to no nation, staffed by people who officially didn't exist. There he learned not just languages and customs but how to inhabit different personalities completely. He studied method acting alongside database management. He learned to forge emotions as easily as documents. He mastered the art of being genuinely fake. The purpose of the Stateless remained opaque even to its members. Kellner had theories but no certainties. They gathered information but not for any specific government. They influenced decisions but not toward any consistent ideology. They accumulated wealth but lived modestly. They seemed to exist simply to prove that existence itself was more fluid than nations wanted to believe. Each member operated independently, their multiple identities intersecting in patterns that no single intelligence agency could track. The UN connection was both real and illusory. Martin Kellner, the UN inspector, was a legitimate identity created through proper channels. The UN had actually hired him, verified his credentials, and sent him on missions. But those credentials had been built on foundations of other identities that were equally real in their respective systems. He was simultaneously a genuine UN employee and a complete fabrication, a paradox that bureaucratic systems couldn't process. The 25 passports represented only his active identities. Kellner admitted to having retired dozens of others over his career. When an identity. Identities. An agricultural report from Michael Anderson might contain one word, an energy analysis from Mikhail Volov might contain another. When assembled in the correct order, these scattered words formed messages that had been hiding in plain sight across dozens of legitimate documents. The search for other members of the Stateless began immediately but proved frustratingly difficult. If Kellner's claims were true, there could be hundreds of people living multiple legal lives across every nation. They could be anyone, anywhere, simultaneously nobody and everybody. Traditional intelligence methods were useless against people who didn't traditionally exist. The legal implications of Kellner's arrest created unprecedented challenges. Which country had jurisdiction over someone who was legally a citizen of 25 nations? Which identity should be prosecuted? Could someone be charged with identity fraud if all the identities were legally genuine? The case exposed fundamental assumptions about citizenship, identity, and law that had never been questioned because no one had imagined they could be challenged this way. The diplomatic crisis that erupted was unlike anything in international relations history. 25 countries demanded custody of their citizen. Each had equal legal claim. The UN demanded return of their employee. International law had no framework for someone who simultaneously belonged to everyone and no one. The situation paralyzed diplomatic channels as lawyers struggled to find applicable precedents in a case that was entirely without precedent. The investigation into how government systems had been compromised revealed vulnerabilities that went beyond technical flaws to fundamental assumptions about identity. Every system assumed that a person could only be one person. Once that assumption was broken, entire frameworks of law, citizenship, and sovereignty collapsed. The stateless hadn't hacked computers. They had hacked the concept of existence itself. The psychiatric evaluation of Kellner revealed a mind that operated on principles psychology had never encountered. He could hold multiple contradictory beliefs simultaneously without cognitive dissonance. He could access different skill sets depending on which identity he inhabited. He could speak languages he claimed not to know when in certain personas. It was as if his brain had developed additional partitions, each containing a complete personality that could be activated or deactivated at will. The historical investigation suggested the stateless had been operating for much longer than Kellner claimed. Similar cases of multiple identities appeared throughout history, always dismissed as clerical errors or coincidences. The organization seemed to have existed in various forms for centuries, evolving with bureaucratic systems, always staying one step ahead of documentation technology. They were ghosts in the machine of civilization itself. Became too visible, too connected, or too problematic, he would stage its death or disappearance, complete with official certificates and closed accounts. He estimated that he had lived over 60 different lives in his 35 years with the stateless, experiencing more existence than most people could in multiple lifetimes. The psychological toll of multiple existence was evident in Kellner's demeanor. He struggled to maintain consistent personality traits, sometimes switching accents mid-sentence, occasionally referring to himself in the third person, frequently losing track of which life's memories he was accessing. The human mind, it seemed, wasn't designed to hold multiple complete identities simultaneously. The result was a fractured consciousness that was simultaneously everyone and no one. The documents found in hidden compartments throughout his apartment revealed operations that spanned decades. As Michael Anderson, he had advised American agricultural companies on African investment, always recommending against exploitation. As Mikhail Volov, he had redirected Russian energy interests away from predatory contracts. As Chen Wei, he had subtly sabotaged Chinese infrastructure projects that would have indebted nations for generations. Each identity had been used to protect African interests from within systems trying to exploit them. This revelation complicated Traoré's position. Kellner wasn't simply a spy or con artist. He appeared to be something unprecedented, a person who had infiltrated the entire concept of nationality to serve purposes that seemed ultimately beneficial. The reports he had filed as the UN inspector were genuinely helpful, identifying real governance issues and suggesting practical solutions. His other identities had similarly positive impacts in their respective roles. The technology investigation revealed that the stateless had developed methods for beating biometric systems that shouldn't have been possible. They could create fingerprints that would register differently to different scanners while appearing identical to human eyes. They could modify retinal patterns temporarily using special contact lenses that lasted just long enough for verification. They could even alter DNA test results through techniques involving temporary chemical modifications that confused testing equipment. The financial forensics showed that the money Kellner received across all identities was meticulously managed. None was spent on luxury or personal gain. Instead, it was channeled through incredibly complex networks to fund education for stateless children, provide medical care for refugees, and support communities damaged by the very organizations that were unknowingly paying him. He was essentially forcing exploitative systems to fund their own opposition. The communication systems Kellner used defied conventional understanding of encryption. He didn't encode messages, he scattered them across the normal communications of his various